Okay, wonderful. Well, as everyone else still continues to populate, I want to get our program started so we stay on time. Welcome to everyone. My name is Lindsay Craig. I'm the president of National Review Institute, the nonprofit parent organization to National Review, established to support and promote the National Review mission. We are so very pleased to host this forum tonight. Despite the uncertain economic times, we are keeping our strategic goals for this project because of its relevance and importance in these important times. In the same spirit that led William F. Buckley Jr. to found National Review Institute is proud to collaborate on this new project to explain, defend, and celebrate capitalism. With so much misinformation and misunderstanding of capitalism and market economics today, National Review Capital Matters, through articles, commentary, forums, and conferences, will serve to elevate voices and amplify the message of those who defend economic liberty. So a tremendous thanks to Garrett Bucas, the publisher of National Review, and Chris McAvoy, and their very dedicated team for putting together this new section on nationalreview.com. And they are now working on marketing along with the truly creative NRI team, Miranda Melvin and Kristen Welch. I want to thank also our lead editor for our project, Andrew Stuttaford, who's just recently joined us, and Daniel Tenrero, the Dusty Rhodes Scholar, for working on so many articles in the lead up to this launch, and will continue to be accepting submissions and reviewing and editing for the section. In addition to important contributions and connections from our senior advisor, Kevin Hassett, David Bonson, Kevin Williamson, Ramesh Panuru, and others, I thank you. And also a very important thank you to National Review Institute's chairman, Peter Travers, who has spearheaded the vision for this project and helped guide the production of National Review Capital Matters for both NR and NRI. Of course, none of this would have happened without the support of National Review's editor-in-chief, Rich Lowry. So again, thank you to all of you who are participating in this rather historic project that we have here. And I want to thank all of you who have joined us this evening. I know that this is an exciting time to learn about a new project that an organization is launching. And so we appreciate the time that you've been able to take this evening to be with us and learn more about what we're doing. We hope to partner with you in many ways over the next coming months and hopefully years. This project is very important to us, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. So without further ado, I want to turn this over to Rich Lowry.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, and thanks so much for the National Review Institute's support for this project. We're very excited and delighted that we have delighted with the response tonight. I think we have nearly 1,000 people on this call to mark this important occasion of the launching of Capital Matters. If you haven't checked out the section today, please do. It looks fantastic, and it's just a token of how important I take this occasion, that I'm not wearing the baseball cap I wear for 99.5% of our Zoom meetings at National Review, and I am squatting in my father-in-law's impressively wood-paneled office. You probably can't see it in the shoulder, behind my shoulder here, but there is a highly politically incorrect colonial era world map back there. When I do occasional cable hits, I'm sure make sure it's not in the picture because I don't want to hear about it on Twitter for weeks. So we live in a time, obviously, of an emboldened left. It has a couple prongs to its assault that we're dealing with at the moment. There's the attack on policing and the related disorder on the streets. There's the cancel culture, some of which is just mindless hatred, but a lot of which is obviously deliberately intended to tilt the intellectual playing field against us. You have the effort to redefine America through its history, exemplified by the 1619 Project. You have the ongoing assault on our governing institutions like the Senate, the Electoral College, and the Constitution. And finally, you have an assault on markets. It's probably more intense than at any time since the fall of the Berlin wall. We live in a time when the so-called moderate Democratic candidate for president, Joe Biden, is explicitly working with the socialists to come up with this policy agenda. And we live in a time when many folks on the right, unfortunately, have lost their interest in and taste for defending markets. So that's the backdrop to this project. Now, obviously, National Review, for about 65 years, we've been involved in defending markets. It's always been a key objective of ours, but this initiative is going to be more focused, deliberate, and energetic than ever before. Obviously, markets are the best way to allocate capital. They create wealth, they create the potential for individual advancement, and they're connected at the hip with personal and political freedom. And we're going to defend them and evangelize for them and explain them in the typical NR style, ferociously as needed, but also always with intelligence and with wit and with a willingness to debate among ourselves. So with that, I'm delighted to bring in the aforementioned Peter Travers, the chairman of the board of the National Review Institute, had a huge role in conceiving of this project, and our dear colleague, Andrew Stuttaford, who's had a long career in finance, has written for National Review literally for decades, and a couple months ago joined us to honcho this project. Welcome, Peter and Andrew.
Thanks, Rich.
So Peter, why don't I start with you? Why don't you tell us what your animating vision is for what National Review Capital Matters will be?
Yeah. First of all, thanks to everyone for joining us and zooming in on this auspicious occasion. Thanks to Rich and Lindsay and Andrew and both Kevins, all Kevins, and Garrett and Ramesh for making the National Review Capital Matters project go. There are a couple things I would say just off the top to try to put it in context. First of all, National Review Institute has been developing events and programs for several years, all to the purpose of extending the classical National Review message of ordered liberty under law in support of the humane and classical values of our civilization, and also understanding the exceptional role of America among nations. And a deep appreciation for economic freedom is also part of that National Review message. You know, in the last 30 years, I like to think of it as since the fall of the Berlin Wall, but it's a little bit of a subjective point in time to mark. More people have been brought out of, lifted up out of extreme poverty than all of prior human history. And it's not accidental. It wasn't just something that happened. It happened because there was a wave of worldwide reforms, capitalist reforms in favor of personal capital formation, international trade, market allocation of capital. And this is something that has been underappreciated, underreported, and underexplained, I think, for a variety of reasons. And I think Capital Matters will help remedy that. I would also point a little bit to the ancient and revered legacy at National Review for this kind of thing in pointing to one of our legendary founding editors of National Review, James Burnham, who understood that in every generation you needed to reformulate and burnish the arguments for freedom. He named his regular column in National Review that dealt with geopolitical conflict and rivalries, the protracted conflict. And the struggle of free societies against totalitarian impulses is a protracted conflict. It's going to be with us for a long time. I believe that's okay because we have better arguments, and I think evidence supports our point of view and the arguments for freedom. I would just say that in the area of economics, this conflict is also present. It's present in things like price discovery, through markets, through private allocation of capital, through, very importantly, entrepreneurial risk-taking. That's very much in contrast to a system where capital is allocated through political pressure and bureaucrats dominate economic decision-making. So I think the role of National Review Capital Markets is similar to what James Burnham had in mind. Is we're in a protracted conflict, over some very important and fundamental issues. And we want to make sure that we're making a very focused and, as you say, ferocious even, set of arguments for economic freedom, and to bring the journalism along with it.
Thank you, Peter. So Andrew, how will this be affected every day on the page? What kind of content are you expecting to run every day?
Well, what we'd like to do is, I think just to take a step back, first we do see ourselves as a platform, and a platform really to make a case that has not been made enough, and there are diminishing spaces, I believe, for it, and also to raise awareness amongst some people that they may say, well, and I'm borrowing actually a little bit from Trotsky, perhaps one shouldn't, but they may say, well, I have no interest in politics, but what we want to show is they're running their business, their ordinary lives. Well, actually, politics has an interest in them, and that needs to be explained. So in terms of what we're going to do every day, and this is, of course, the foundation of it all, will be what appears on the website. And that will be a couple of articles a day. We started off with the plan of maybe 5 to 7 a week. Maybe it'll be a little bit more than that. And really, I really would emphasize the use of the word platform. What we want to attract is, there's a lot of writers. There's Ramesh, Kevin, who a lot of people here will also have known and enjoyed their writing for many, many years. Mine, which many people may or may not enjoy.
I enjoy it, at least, Andrew.
Well, thank you, Rich. Well, thank you, Rich. And also we have another young guy, Daniel Tenrero, whose name I hope will grow very familiar to you all. So we will be regularly writing, but also we will attract other people, some of whom we've written before for NR before, but will now be appearing more often. But also people who really haven't had much of a voice or much of a platform, really to make this case. And when I say this case, there are many cases and many ways of looking at these issues to talk through not only the issues of the day, but more long-standing issues. There's a long debate, there's a growing debate now about stakeholder capitalism. That won't be resolved in one article or 50 articles, but someone needs to say, well, hang on a second, have you got this right? And also, and you alluded to this, there are divisions on the right. One of National Review's proud traditions, I think, is that we are happy to entertain dissent within the right. And I would also expect that we will publish things, whether from economists or commentators or businessmen, that will say contradictory things. One chap may say, well, I think there's going to be inflation. If that's the case, we are very happy to publish someone the next day who says there's not going to be inflation. One other thing I think I would stress is that not everything we have to do has to be political. My view, and of course that reflects my opinions, but my view is if you explain how free markets work, if you explain what free markets do, that in itself is enough to make, or goes a very long way to making the case without actually you having to say at the end, and that's why free markets are a good thing. If you just explain, let people draw their own conclusions. And that can mean outside the Acceler corridor. You go, what we would like to do is go and see businesses. What are businesses doing? What is the value that they are bringing to their shareholders, and very often, and usually actually, to society?
Great, thank you, Andrew. So I'm going to say farewell just briefly to Peter and Andrew, bring in our two Kevins and Ramesh Panuru for the next portion of this conversation, Kevin Williamson and Kevin Hassett. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. How you doing?
Oh, thanks.
So Kevin Hassett, why don't we start with you? You've been recently on both ends of this. You longtime think tanker, longtime writer and columnist, also been on the inside and been a policymaker at the Council of Economic Advisors, and then you recently came back to help the administration deal with COVID and the economic response. So in your mind, what is important about National Review Capital Matters?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Rich. And thanks for organizing this webinar and Capital Matters. The issue, I think, honestly, is that there needs to be a place where you can expect folks to focus on the evidence, whatever it might say, and be willing to accept the idea that, incentives matter, that if you have a, say, $15 minimum wage, surprise, surprise, some folks might lose their job. And it's getting harder and harder to find places where it's safe to voice opinions that are deeply scientifically based. I think that one of the things that I noticed, especially during the tax cut debate when I was in the White House in my first stint there as chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors, was how the entire left at times seemed to me to be in science denial. They accused Republicans of being science deniers left and right. But, there's all this literature that says that incentives matter, then some things respond, some things don't, and so on. And we're entering a world where everybody has to say these sort of like unscientific liberal thoughts, or they're not allowed places, on the stage. And I think that the Wall Street Journal does a very good job of punching back now and then. But I'm so excited about Capital Matters because there's basically going to be a place where honest, serious analysis from the left and from the right, but fact-based and collegial, is going to be there every day. And I think that what we're going to do is we're going to create, basically, hopefully, a whole new generation of people that can inform thinkers and voters and pundits and everybody with serious analysis, and understand that we're going to protect them and create a safe space for serious analysis that's respectful of the idea that maybe capitalism works most of the time.
So Ramesh, like me, you're an old National Review hand now. What are your thoughts about this moment and the consequence of this moment and what we can contribute to the debate over markets?
So I'm not sure what T.S. Eliot's views on free market capitalism were. But he did contribute the thought that there are no lost causes because there are no gained causes. And it strikes me, Rich, that when you and I started at National Review was something of a high tide intellectually for free markets. And there was a sense that they'd sort of swept all before them, and it was now just a question of arguing about details. But in recent years, we've really seen a recrudescence, to use a great Bill Buckley word, of socialism and a kind of forgetting of the case for markets. So I think it's important to make that case. And it's important to make that case not just to liberals and left-wingers, but to conservatives. The case for markets can sometimes be made in a way that sounds utopian and unconservative. But really it's based on a process of trial and error that has led to an understanding of what works and what doesn't work. And conservatism begins with gratitude for all the blessings we have as individuals, as families, communities, as a society, and tries to build on those blessings. And so I would say I'm a capitalist because I'm a conservative. And that's a case that needs constantly to be renewed. We need to explain how markets work, why they work, and in those cases where they don't seem to be working, how they can be made to work better, which very often will involve eliminating some of the obstacles that we've put into their path.
So Kevin, actually, Ramesh, it was the tide of markets was running so high when we started at National Review that both of us thought that perhaps Phil Gramm could be elected president. And that was our initial lesson in crushing political defeat, was the Gramm 1996 campaign. Well, if anyone knows what T.S. Eliot's views on markets were, it'd be Kevin Williamson, who's a T.S. Eliot guy among many other things. So Kevin, what do you got for us?
Well, I will say that Elliot mostly developed his feelings about capitalism while working on the foreign transactions desk in some dank, horrible sub-basement at Lloyd's, and hated that job and sort of never forgave banking in general. And it's sort of, when you think about it, it's kind of an error that a lot of us make, that we tend to overgeneralize from our own experiences. And Elliot took this view of modern capitalism as being kind of soul-crushing and impersonal and uniformizing, but I think it was mostly his own experience. There's a, so you didn't think that was actually going to work, did you? But there it goes. There's a tendency in journalism, I think, that I hope that we can combat with this project, which is to try to scandalize economic news and scandalize business news. And it's not to say there's not scandals in that world. There are from time to time. But events are sometimes, or very often, presented as scandalous in the economic news and in the business news when there's no obvious reason for them to be. So, you know, every now and then you'll see the story that comes out that, well, here's a company and the guy who started the company makes this much money, and the guy who works in a warehouse makes 1/200th of that. And it's presented as though this were self-evidently shocking. And no one ever stops to say, well, why should that be thought of as shocking? Why isn't that just the ordinary natural order of things where some people make more money for different kinds of work? Or you'll see this when companies fail very often. You know, if a company goes bankrupt, a company makes a bad investment, a company tries something that doesn't work, and there'll be these stories in the news about all these people are out of work because these executives were doing something wrong, as though they got up in the morning and said, wow, we can make our company go bankrupt. That's a good way to get rich, which doesn't normally work out that well for people. So there's a lot of covert emotion in the business news and the financial news. And I think a lot of that has to do with something that I've written about a lot, which is this weird thing in American intellectual life where you have a lot of people who are kind of socially and culturally and educationally adjacent to people to whom they are not actually economically adjacent. So you have a lot of journalists at places like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and other places like that, who live in a world which also includes people like Mark Zuckerberg or various other tech executives and things like that, who are just sort of a different order level of wealthy. And the intersection between those two things, I think, presents a kind of resentment, first of all, but then also it's an opportunity to create a kind of dramatic narrative where it doesn't necessarily even exist. And so there's a lot of, I think, kind of covert score settling psychologically going on in business news. And I think that a more disciplined and repertorial model of how to cover those stories would be a great service to everyone.
So Kevin Hassett, as I mentioned earlier, you've been on the inside. How does the intellectual and policy debate look from that perspective? Is it different? You know, the rest of us here, we're pundits and analysts and pretty much always have been. So we have a certain idea of what matters in a debate. Is that sense different when you're on the inside?
You know, I think it's actually the closer you get to the inside, and you know, my first day back in the White House, my second trip when I went as a senior advisor to the president for economic policy, I spent most of the day in the Senate Finance Committee room negotiating the Phase 3 deal, although I guess people debate what the right number is, and meeting with, you know, Democratic and Republican staff and Democratic and Republican senators. And I was there with Larry Kudlow and Stephen Mnuchin, and constant communication with Mark Meadows and the president. And the thing I could say is that the closer you get to the actual action, most of the time, you're really impressed by the patriotism of the actors and the desire to do the right thing. And I kind of feel like, and you could even see that if you look at the really kind of impressive response to this, you know, terrible COVID crisis, in terms of the legislation that passed, that sure was filled with lots of flaws, but, you know, you had to get stuff through with unanimous consent in the Senate. And because of the national emergency, folks were able to do that, because basically almost everybody you meet when you're actually dealing with them on a crucial American issue inside a room, you know, you could tell that they're a good person who wants to do the right thing. The problem is that somehow those folks go out on TV and they turn into, you know, mixed martial artists or something, right? And so that the glimpse that you have of the way that people interact is way, way different from what actually happens. And so, and one way you can see that is that you know, every time one party or the other wins an election, then the other side says, oh, the world's going to end, I'm going to move to New Zealand. But then, you know, things kind of work out. And I think it's because there are a heck of a lot of sensible people who want to do the right thing. And there's more than you would think if you're just like looking from the outside. And so I think, Rich, you know, I see you on TV all the time. The world that you live in is more hostile and unreasonable than the actual political world where policy is made. And I think that that's a hope for Capital Matters. You know, the last couple of thoughts about that is just that, you know, so when people think about ideologies, I think that the ideology that capital matters, that if you want to help blue collar workers, if you want to help people who don't have a job become workers, if you want to help, you know, the people of society, then you need to give them more capital to work with. And that if you have a policy that's adversarial to capital, that's hostile to capital, then you're going to hurt not just the capitalists, or the people who own the capital, but the workers as well. You know, I think that that view is one that's really out of fashion in big chunks of society right now. And so at Capital Matters, what we're going to do is we're going to be with stuff, whether it's working. You know, suppose maybe we help people acquire a lot more capital, and then because they have so much power over workers' wages don't go up. You know, if that happens, we'll report it. But we're going to be data driven, and we're going to believe, I think, not only in the power of the American spirit, but the power of the American spirit in policymakers in Washington. So that if we provide evidence, we want to be the place where they could trust that the data are accurate. If we make a mistake, we fix it. And we provide convincing evidence that, you know, this is the right thing to do, that's the wrong thing to do, and hopeful that that'll have a big effect on the future of America, the future of American policy.
Great. So I'm going to bring Andrew and Peter back in, so we're all together, and throw some more questions at folks. So Peter, when we were talking with Andrew earlier, Andrew said correctly just how important increasing the understanding of markets is to this project. So how much, in your view, how much of the hostility to markets has to do with just a simple lack of understanding of how they work, and how much is reflexive ideological hostility despite understanding how they work?
I think it's very much the former, and it's an excellent question. You know, at National Review, we like to cite O'Sullivan's Law. At least my version of it is, people are conservative in the areas which they know a great deal about. And I don't think that's accidental. I think it's actually a fairly deep insight. People who are familiar with how a business works, I would extend it for markets, how an entrepreneur has an idea, finds funding, you know, struggles to develop a product, fails 99 times out of 100. Or a manager who's trying to figure out, how do I make this product better, cheaper, in a way that is sustainable? These are things that are, as Kevin was referring to in the political world, it takes place in the business world too. You know, I've seen an awful lot of businessmen and women in different contexts, and it's astounding how much they really want to do the right thing for the most part. Not always, but it really is the way the world tends to work, and it tends to work when more so when more is at stake. But I would also say I like to think of economic freedom in a congruent way with political freedom. What markets provide is economic information, in the same way that elections provide political information. It allows every citizen to participate in a way that provides information to that citizen and to the society, and makes it better for all of us, gives us a chance to be flexible, innovative, and free.
So Ramesh, you mentioned in your opening remarks this forgetting on parts among some elements of the right about the importance and desirability of markets. What accounts in your mind for that forgetting?
Well, I think that the right, no less than the left, is susceptible to the silent artillery of time. And the way these debates were live in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and haven't been recently, I think people just genuinely, literally forget. And new people come along and who never had to develop that understanding in the first place. Then too, I think that we had a period of disappointing economic returns. I would say roughly 2000 to 2014. We had one mild recession, one very severe recession, and two somewhat sluggish recoveries. And that was a very long period of stagnation. If you were in the middle of the income distribution, you weren't getting ahead at the way Americans had been accustomed to getting ahead for a long time. And if you were below that median, you were actually going backwards. You add to that a sense of not just personal but national decline, and I think that that you get the kind of reaction against capitalism that we've seen. Now, sometimes, yeah, I think to a very large extent, that's a misunderstanding of what's happened, and I think it's very related to the fact that we had a burst of economic policy reform in the late 70s and early 80s that we've been living off of. And there are a number of problems that have developed in our system when it comes to, for example, overregulated housing markets or a somewhat sclerotic higher education system that we haven't tackled. And so the problems have been accumulating.
So Kevin Williamson, what's your belief about how intellectual debates are won or lost, and how can Capital Matters contribute?
Yeah, on the earlier question, which I think is related to that, I think one of the things that's really changed for conservatives is that the most influential business elites, which particularly in finance and in technology on the coasts, over the years have become much more socially progressive, much more politically aligned with the Democratic Party. And I think some of the anti-market attitudes and anti-big business attitudes you've seen on the right are in reaction to that. I remember I wrote a piece for during the 2008 election. I was talking about the defection of Wall Street guys to the Democrats and to the Obama campaign. And as one guy who works on Wall Street told me, you're not going to see a lot of Sarah Palin t-shirts on Parents' Day at Choate. It's culturally a pretty bright line there in some ways. And as the Republican Party and the right has in some ways culturally oriented itself more toward rural and working class concerns, it's created a kind of vacuum there, I think. I don't think that we really, I think that we put too much emphasis on rhetoric. You often hear people tell you, well, if we could think of a different way to talk about this, then people would agree with us. I don't think that's really true. I think that people react the way they react to business, to markets, to trade, for reasons that are beyond questions of rhetoric. But that being said, I do think we talk about this stuff in the wrong way very often. One thing I've emphasized in my writing over the years is that we always talk about the competitive aspects of capitalism, and that's fine. It's competition's a part of how markets work, but every animal competes for scarce resources. We're not doing anything that rats and ants and manatees don't do. What's really remarkable about
so uplifting. People are really going to be inspired by this webinar.
Let me get to the inspiring part, though, Rich, which is that what actually is really remarkable about our current period in time and our current period in human history is that we've achieved this really remarkable apparatus of worldwide cooperation, where we are, what we call globalization, for lack of a better term, is a way in which people from all sorts of different countries who have different religions and different politics, who don't know each other, who often wouldn't like each other, either individually or collective. They're from competing ethnic groups, competing religious groups, competing national groups, all manage to somehow work together to make life iteratively a little bit better every 6 months, at least in purely material terms. And I think that is really something miraculous and something that really is inspiring. And that's a story that I don't think we emphasize enough, is the cooperative nature of it, and what Hayek described as using markets to discover the most valuable ways to serve each other.
So Kevin Hassett, any reaction to anything Ramesh or Kevin just said, and what's your sense of how and why the debate maybe slid away from us in recent years, and how do we pull it back?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would actually, Ramesh, I would adjust, if you look at the charts, the time frame in terms of slow recovery to 2016. That, that the year before President Trump went in office, you're looking at, this at the time measured 1% GDP growth and no wage growth forever. And then he comes in with some policies that National Review ardently supported, some policies that you argued against, but deregulation and tax cuts led to much higher growth. We got that year of 3% growth and revised down to 2.9 last I checked. And we got much higher wage growth. Income inequality started declining. Blue collar wages were higher, were increasing faster than white collar wages. The bottom 10% wages were growing faster than the top 10% and so on. And so the desire to create a friendly environment for business led to, I would say, increased social justice. It made the world a better place. And I think that one of the problems is that story could have been the story we were debating running into this election. But now it's been disrupted by this event from outside, this COVID crisis, that makes it much harder to look back to the amazing data through January and say, hey guys, let's go through this and this and this. And I could finally say that if you look at the when government and socialism spreads, it's in times of crisis. And this time, we're not looking at a crisis that was caused by an economic failure that came from policies. We're looking at an economic crisis and a human crisis that came from a pandemic. And the second quarter GDP number is, after all the revisions and everything, it's for sure going to be, minus 30, minus 40%. It's going to be the biggest decline that you've just about ever seen. And you're going to have a strong second half, but you're probably not going to capture all that back. And so, I think that if we had a 40% decline in GDP, through January, after all of President Trump's policies, then I think that it would be rational to consider, well, geez, we need a completely different model. But I think that what's happening now is that the opportunists, the people who want to use government to acquire power for themselves, who want to sell really snake oil socialism to the masses and use it to acquire power, have an opportunity precisely now because of that second quarter number. That if the January numbers had run all the way through, I think that we wouldn't be in this state. And so, that observation perhaps is a little bit chilling because the second quarter number is real, the pandemic is still with us. And so that opportunity is going to be a vibrant one for the opponents of the society that existed in January. But on the other hand, it's, I think, a somewhat reassuring place to be in the sense that I think the data through January proved that what we said would happen. What National Review's been saying all the way back to its founding would happen, happened once you had a president that was mostly committed to those economic policies. And so my view is that it feels like a really, really bad time for capitalism, but it's not capitalism that made the second quarter.
So in a couple of minutes we have left, I'm going to bring it down to a little more granular level on this project and ask you, Andrew, how do you envision reaching a new audience? Because obviously nationalreview.com has a strong, loyal reader base, but in my introduction, I use the word evangelize advisedly. We really want to spread the word. And I think you've got some indications in the soft launch phase of this before today that we can reach new readers with this sort of content.
I think so. I think that we can. I mean, these things takes time. Good writing attracts good readers, and we need to show that we have good writers and we have them on a consistent basis. But I think that what sort of thing that we're looking for is really people perhaps whose prime interest, and this is when I'm talking about new readers, I hope for existing readers that we can just add more to the menu that hopefully that they're already enjoying. But for new readers, people who haven't looked in at National Review and may not be, it's just not a place they want to go or haven't been that interested, but they are interested in the subject matter. And they don't care where they read it, but what they care is what they read. And if you can produce information, an argument, debate, or investigation, which is something that maybe you can't find elsewhere, then I think people will read it. And everyone always, at launches and things, always has a happy anecdote. But a friend of mine who wrote one article for us, one of his friends said that he'd read the article and it was the first thing that he'd ever read at National Review. He's by no means a person on the right, but that he was interested by the article. And if there were other articles like that, that he would come back. So I think we've opened up a new
Let the market decide.
Let the market decide. There's more room on the shelf, and hopefully that will attract new consumers.
And Peter, talk a little bit about how important this is just in terms of growing the portfolio, growing and deepening the portfolio of what National Review covers.
Well, I think it's important in a couple different levels. I mean, there's a strategic and there's a tactical level. National Review Institute has been, I think, a significant success in developing a lot of ancillary programs really to support this same mission. And what the Institute really wants to do is to see National Review, the publication, expand its ability not just to distribute the classical National Review material in through different venues and channels, but also to sharpen the focus. Of course, you know, as deep thinkers, we all know that everything's connected to everything, and yet there is a specific set of principles, there's a specific set of stories in the area of finance and business and economics and raising standards of living, which we can tell because we have National Review has a specific perspective, and it's done this to some extent through the years. But to be able to bring that sensibility, which is not one directional, it's a very, in the classic National Review term, it's a gimlet eye at free market capitalism and economic freedom, understanding the tremendous value, social value in economic value that system provides, but also looking at it critically. And I think being able to do that at National Review is really going to be a first of perhaps several, but certainly a very important portfolio of journalism and commentary that I think will strengthen our publication and will help it lead to become a much more robust and broad-based media business.
So before I bring this webinar to a close, and really appreciate all of you being part of it, Ramesh, going to go to you for a final word of encouragement. More inspiring than what Kevin came up with all.
I like the manatees, though.
Look, I think that every generation of conservatives faces a different set of challenges, and we have to attach our principles to the circumstances that we find ourselves in, show how they work. I do think that there's a lot of room to make America work better by unleashing markets, by reforming markets through private sector and public sector initiatives. And I think we're assembling a great group of people who are going to tackle some of those problems, debate with one another how we can move forward.
Yeah, I would just say in conclusion, I mentioned cancel culture at the beginning. I think one of the really important things about National Review is that it can't be canceled. You know, eventually the left is going to come after our advertising. We like our advertisers. We like that revenue. It's not our most important source of revenue. We don't have any partnerships with big corporations who are subject to the whims of Twitter and can get pushed around by a few idiots on Twitter. We're not owned by a billionaire who's subject to social pressures this way and that. The reason why it can't be canceled is we have all of you out there who are with us every single day, who are reading us, who are subscribing to us, who are donating to us. So we got a fortified island that can never be sunk because of what you do. And we're not doing the Benedict option on this island. We're not hiding any bunkers. We have a fighting faith. We have artillery from our island trained every day on the other side. And Capital Matters is going to add even more artillery to that every single day. So we really appreciate your interest in it and support of it. And with that, I want to thank both Kevins. In my mind, there is no such thing as a lesser Kevin. And thank
Kevin Drum, maybe.
Thank Ramesh, thank Andrew, and thank Peter, and thank again all of you for being a part of this webinar. God bless you, and God bless America.